The show had just rolled a clip of First Lady Melania Trump speaking at a charity event earlier that week. Her calm, graceful voice carried through the speakers as she spoke about kindness, family values, and the importance of compassion in a divided world. Her accent, gentle, European, unmistakably her own, gave every word a certain elegance. The audience listened quietly, some nodding along, others smiling politely. Then the host smirked. You could almost sense what was coming. As the clip ended, he leaned closer to the camera and began to mimic Melania's voice, exaggerating her accent, stretching her words into something cartoonish. "I am Melania, and I love to decorate," he said mockingly, waving his hands in imitation. The crowd chuckled at first, unsure if they should. Then the laughter grew louder, echoing through the studio. But it wasn't the usual kind of laughter. It was nervous, awkward, almost forced. A few people in the audience exchanged glances, as if silently asking each other, "Is this okay?" And that's when everything changed. Sitting across from the host that night was President Donald Trump himself. At first, he had watched the segment, with a neutral expression, even a faint smile as if humoring the situation. But as the laughter continued, his demeanor shifted. His eyes narrowed slightly and the hint of a smile disappeared. Trump leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk between them. The room seemed to quiet on its own. The laughter died almost instantly, replaced by a tense, uneasy silence. The host, still grinning, didn't seem to realize what was about to happen. When Trump finally spoke, his tone wasn't loud or angry. It was calm, low, and deliberate. Yet every word carried an unmistakable weight. "Let me tell you something about Melania," he said, his voice steady. "She speaks 5 languages. She's smart, strong, and more dignified than anyone gives her credit for." The room froze. You could have heard a pin drop. The host's smile faded as he realized this was no longer a comedy segment. This was a moment of truth, and President Trump had just taken control of the room. The host, known for his sharp wit and fearless jokes, probably thought it was all just harmless fun, another night of teasing public figures for the sake of ratings and laughter. He was confident, comfortable in his territory, surrounded by cameras and a live audience ready to cheer on every punchline. After all, this was what he did best, make people laugh, even at the expense of others. He leaned forward with that familiar grin and said, "You know, Melania's speeches always sound so robotic. It's like she's reading straight from a teleprompter without blinking." The crowd chuckled, and sensing he had their attention, he pushed further. With an exaggerated accent and over-the-top gestures, he continued, "I'm Melania, and I love Christmas decorations." The studio erupted in laughter, but not everyone joined in. A few people glanced toward the other end of the stage, where President Donald Trump sat, his expression unreadable. He wasn't laughing. In fact, he hadn't moved an inch. His hands were folded, his posture straight, his eyes fixed on the host. For a brief moment, the host didn't notice. He was caught up in his own performance, letting the audience's laughter fuel him. But slowly, as the laughter began to die down, he felt something change. The energy in the room shifted. It was as if the temperature had dropped a few degrees. Trump's gaze didn't waver. It wasn't angry. It was something deeper, colder, quieter. Then, without a word, he lifted his hand slightly, a simple, deliberate gesture that told the host to stop. The movement was small, but its effect was immediate. The laughter faded completely. The audience sensed that something serious was about to happen. When Trump finally spoke, his voice was calm and low, but it carried through the studio like a wave. "Let me tell you something about Melania," he began, leaning forward just slightly. "She speaks 5 languages. She's intelligent, graceful, and she's tougher than anyone in this room gives her credit for." The crowd went silent. The host blinked, unsure how to respond. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail. Trump's steady tone, the host's awkward half-smile, the uneasy stillness in the air. Trump wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried more impact than anger ever could. In that moment, every person in the studio could feel it. This was no longer about comedy. It was about respect. Trump continued. His sharp eyes locked onto the host, who suddenly seemed much smaller behind his glossy desk and flashing smile. The air in the studio was heavy. Every camera, every person in the audience, every crew member knew something real was unfolding. This wasn't scripted television anymore. This was raw, unfiltered emotion. You see, Trump began, his tone calm but firm, people like to make fun of her accent. He paused for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. But that accent represents someone who came to this country, worked hard, built a life, and became the First Lady of the United States. His voice didn't rise, but it resonated with power. That's not something to mock. That's something to respect. The audience froze. You could almost feel the weight of the silence pressing down on the room. No applause, no laughter, just a quiet realization that the line between humor and disrespect had been crossed. A few people in the crowd lowered their eyes, suddenly uncomfortable. The host, known for his quick comebacks and smooth transitions, looked momentarily lost. His usual confidence wavered as he shuffled his cue cards, trying to find the next topic or a clever response. But none came. His trademark smirk faltered, and for the first time that evening, he looked uncertain. Trump leaned back slightly, his expression calm but unwavering. "Melania doesn't do this kind of talking often," he said, glancing briefly toward the audience before turning his gaze back to the host. "But when she does, she means what she says. That's more than I can say for a lot of people in the media." The words hit like a quiet thunderclap. No yelling, no dramatic gestures, just a simple statement, but it carried an undeniable sting. The host swallowed hard, forcing a nervous chuckle that didn't quite land. His eyes darted toward the camera, as if searching for an escape. At that moment, the tension in the studio was so thick, you could almost hear it. The faint hum of the lights, the rustle of someone shifting in their seat, the sound of silence itself. Finally, the host managed to murmur, "Well, that's fair, Mr. Trump." And just like that, the tension broke. The audience collectively exhaled as if everyone had been holding their breath through the entire exchange. The laughter was gone, replaced by something far more powerful, respect, and a sense that they had just witnessed a moment that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Within just a few hours, the clip from that unforgettable talk show segment was everywhere. It started as a short video posted by a member of the studio audience, but it spread like wildfire across social media. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube lit up with heated debates, reactions, and countless re-uploads. Every frame, every pause, every word from that exchange between the host and President Trump was analyzed, captioned, and discussed by millions. On Twitter, hashtags like Trump defends Melania and talk show silence began trending worldwide. Some users praised Trump for what they called one of his most human moments, saying it was refreshing to see him speak calmly but powerfully in defense of his wife. "You can agree or disagree with his politics," one tweet read, "but you have to respect the way he stood up for Melania tonight." Thousands of similar posts echoed that sentiment, applauding the president for showing restraint and dignity instead of anger. But not everyone saw it that way. Critics argued that the host's imitation had been nothing more than a harmless joke, the kind of light-hearted humor that late-night shows were built on. They accused Trump of overreacting and trying to turn comedy into confrontation. "Presidents shouldn't take everything so seriously," one commentator wrote. "If you can't laugh at yourself or your family, maybe you shouldn't sit in the front row." Still, even among those who disagreed, there was a shared acknowledgement of one thing, that the tension in that studio was unlike anything anyone had ever seen on live television. The host's laughter, the sudden silence, Trump's measured tone, it all created a moment that felt unscripted, raw, and strangely powerful. The following night, the host addressed the controversy at the start of his show. His usual grin was there, but the energy was different, more cautious, more aware. "Comedy's about finding the line," he said to the audience, "and sometimes we cross it." His voice tried to sound confident, but even through the screen, viewers could sense the hesitation. The laughter that followed was polite, not the usual thunderous applause. A few days later, Melania Trump herself broke the silence, not with an interview or statement, but with a single post on her social media. It read, "Respect is earned not by mocking others, but by showing kindness and strength." Those 15 words went viral instantly. Millions shared it, quoting her message as a graceful response that needed no names, no defense, just quiet dignity. And in the digital storm that followed, her calm, composed voice was the one that truly stood out. Weeks passed, yet the clip from that tense, unforgettable talk show moment refused to fade away. It lived on across every corner of the internet, shared, analyzed, and debated by millions. What many expected to be a passing viral moment became something more significant. Commentators across television and online platforms began calling it a rare Trump moment, not because he argued or lashed out, but precisely because he didn't. Instead of his usual fiery energy or quick rebuttals, President Trump had chosen calmness. His voice had been steady, his words deliberate, his tone respectful. It was unexpected, almost disarming. People who had watched Trump for years, supporters and critics alike, found themselves replaying the clip, surprised by how controlled and thoughtful his reaction had been. Political analysts discussed it on news panels. Body language experts dissected his posture and tone, describing it as measured but commanding. Comment sections filled with thousands of comments from viewers who admitted they had never seen him quite like that before. It wasn't about politics, one user wrote. It was about respect, and he delivered it without raising his voice once. As the conversation continued online, the moment began to represent something bigger than just a clash between a talk show host and a president. It became a reflection of how society often treats people who are different, those with accents, unique backgrounds, or quieter personalities. Many saw in Melania's story a reminder that dignity and strength don't always need loudness to be heard. Clips of her past speeches resurfaced, and fans highlighted her journey, from growing up in Slovenia to becoming the First Lady of the United States. Commenters spoke about how her accent was not something to laugh at, but something to admire, a symbol of perseverance and courage. Meanwhile, the host's mockery slowly lost its grip on public attention. What was once a punchline turned into an uncomfortable memory, a lesson in how quickly humor can cross into disrespect. But Trump's response, calm, protective, and deeply personal, stayed in people's minds. And perhaps that's why the silence that filled that studio that night wasn't awkward after all. Maybe it was a rare moment of realization, a collective pause to remember that words, even those meant as jokes, carry weight, and that sometimes the most powerful message isn't delivered with anger or noise, but with quiet conviction and respect.